If our goal is to create a model about reality, then we need to be acknowledging the limitations that come with building a model of reality. One of the primary limitations is language and how we are expressing what we're trying to describe with our model. The goal should never be to express a perfect or objective description of reality, because that goal is impossible. We cannot describe a perfect description of reality. But if we can't describe reality perfectly, or we can't have an accurate representation of reality, then what is the purpose or what's the point of describing any of reality at all? One of the main criticisms that I get when I'm building this model of reality is that it's not accurate or it contradicts itself. I don't deny either of these points. My model is inaccurate and it does contradict itself. There isn't any way to get around this when describing reality. We're going to start by talking about why this is the case and why it's impossible to accurately describe reality. And then from there, we're going to talk about meaning and purpose and how it applies to building a model about reality. And then finally, I'm going to give you some reasons for why I'm building a model of reality and how I feel it's useful for me and others to know. So we're going to start first with metaphysics and why metaphysics isn't actually able to be described. So metaphysics is a perspective about philosophy that is attempting to describe the framework or the meta framework that all of existence falls within. I'm not going to die on the hill of saying that language doesn't have an objective meaning. There's a very interesting philosophical discussion to be had about what objectivity is, what meaning is, and what truth is. But what I'm trying to say here is that every experience of language that we have is an internal experience provided to us from our brain. And as a result of that, when we are expressing or trying to point out some qualia that we're having inside of ourselves, it is always necessarily limited and relative to our description of what we're trying to point out. In addition to that, it can't actually encapsulate or capture the framework or the meta framework that qualia is arising out of. The reasons and the descriptions that I'm providing are in a way kind of an oxymoron. When it comes to metaphysics and talking about how language encapsulates the reality that we're existing in, there are no words or languages or operations that we can actually use to describe any of that. I can't provide a reasoning or a set of words that can prove this to you, because that would undo the point that I'm making. And so instead, I kind of have to rely on you to inspect the qualia or the experiences that you're having, and then try yourself to put them into a language and express it in a consistent and accurate and objective way. Now, if you have done that, then please come to me and we can make a lot of money together. But if you can't do that, then you fall into the reality that all of us fall into. And that reality is one where we cannot express, or we cannot objectively, from the way that we traditionally think about language, experience the qualia that another person or even ourselves is expressing with the language that we're using. When I'm talking about my model within the videos that are following and previous, everything that I am saying is uncertain, inconsistent, and will always be found to be contradictory. This is a fact of building models about reality. We are existing in this bubble of reality that we are having. So let's say that's the qualia or the infinitesimally small moment of existence that we're having at this particular moment, right? So the now, this thing, the tangibleness of existence right now is this bubble that is surrounding this person here, which is us. There is a huge amount of uncertainty from an information or a language standpoint surrounding us entirely, because we can't with certainty describe it. But from our internal, from the qualia's perspective, there is no uncertainty about what is happening. There is only what is happening, and there is no other description of anything else. In this moment right now, if you try to point to anything outside of your experience, there isn't anything to point to. We can imagine something else, something outside of us, but that imagination necessarily brings into existence the internal experience of that thing existing somewhere else, right? And that in itself is the qualia that is existing presently in your brain. It's not necessarily like in your head. It is rather that there is an experience. So what I'm trying to do right now is an impossible task. I am trying to provide you with an understanding of the base existence that is providing us the qualia and the experiences that we're having. So there is this reality that is, from some perspectives, the qualia that we're experiencing, or from other perspectives, the greater extended reality that we are interacting with. And it is fundamentally from an information standpoint, as we are existing and progressing from a human brain perspective, in that we are processing information. We are using induction to uncertainly process data that is coming into us and then making predictions and simulating a meta model about reality in order to get the reality that we exist within inside our head. But from a even higher perspective, there is a qualia, or an experience of this tangible thing that is existing. And then everything additional to that is a language or a description that we are applying on top of it, but also that description and that language is itself the existence or the qualia. There's no way to really express a description of metaphysics because it's always going to be found to be contradictory. What you're trying to say is that there is like this thing, but it's also not this thing, but it's everything. It doesn't lay out into any kind of logical form that actually makes sense. And so when we start describing, or we start placing the metaphysical foundation or the qualia that we are experiencing and having into a language, we are going to necessarily fall into some kind of daydream. There is a huge philosophical discussion to be had about what it means to be in a daydream. Because again, if we're just taking qualia from some perspective as the objective certainty about reality, then there is no such thing as daydreams. There is no such thing as illusion. Everything is reality, and everything, even in the experiences of just imagining something, is reality. But from the perspective of a human who is simply going about their life, experiencing things as though there's time and space, and this narrative that is extending forward and backwards through time, when we apply language in the typical way that we think of like applying a model in, say, physics or in science or in any kind of discipline that is trying to predict something, the language that we're using to operate on reality as though we have an objective model about reality is in essence a daydream from this specific perspective. From the metaphysics perspective, we are not necessarily or at all really describing a daydream, because there is no differentiation here between what is a daydream or what is reality. But from a more standard perspective, if we're not trying to dive super deep into the philosophy of metaphysics, then what we are doing is we are essentially building a predictive model about how reality works, or rather a way to regard how reality works, so that we can better make decisions from the meaning that we have in reality, or even as a way to define meaning, or as a way to define the choices that we might even have. But whenever we make this kind of definition, or whenever we make this kind of model, what we are necessarily doing from this perspective that we're taking is we are having a daydream about how reality operates, about how things work. We're not actually expressing what is happening in reality. We're not actually expressing how reality is playing out, or how it exists, or how it manifests. Rather, we are making a model in our head so that we can more easily operate within the reality that we're presented with from our perspective. So if we take a super skeptical perspective of, let's say, metaphysics, what we're going to find is that there is really no definition, or there is really no reality, and there is no such thing as not reality. Everything is just kind of what it is, and it exists, and that's it. My primary point here is that we cannot use language to express the fundamental aspects of reality, and I'm not claiming that I can. All I'm attempting to do is build a daydream from my perspective about reality that provides me a useful framework through which I can go about living my life until I die. And that is the only purpose of this model. What I am really trying to point out here is the kind of ambiguity of the bedrock that we exist within, and the impossible task of attempting to describe that bedrock, or attempting to build anything accurate and objective and truly philosophically sound. A good example would be, say, the difference between the words non-duality and duality. So non-duality is a position that all of existence is a single existence occurring at once, essentially, and duality is a claim that there is a bifurcation between the subject and the content of existence. We can describe reality from a dualist perspective, and we can describe reality from a non-dualist perspective. But in either regard, the truth of the matter, the reality that is occurring, is found in neither of those descriptions. The truth of the matter is found in the moment that you are experiencing at this particular moment. No metaphysical description will ever encompass that. Once we have accepted the fact that we can never truly describe reality, and we can never have an accurate model of reality, we can now start moving forward with useful models of reality, or things that we experience as providing us an aesthetic of meaning that we desire out of reality. We are projecting a desire into the future, or into our current moment, that we want to see, or we would like to see, because of the base fact that we have some form of meaning. We now need to talk about, from this kind of nebulous idea of not having anything that we can hold on to strongly or certainly, we need to think about meaning and purpose. And we need to figure out, why would we even have meaning, or how can we have meaning, or how can we have purpose in a reality that we can't describe or state as having any kind of objective description. So we've done away with any kind of attempt at describing reality accurately or objectively or in a consistent and certain way. But we still have desires and the will to do certain things. And so it brings into this question of why do we do things, or what should we do, or how do we even make choices? And so this is where meaning and purpose comes into play. The way that I think about meaning is that it is significant in the fact that we describe it as meaning. Meaning doesn't require a meaningful origin. We don't have to have some greater being or existence applying some kind of meaning or purpose to our lives. Instead, all we need is the sense that something is meaningful to have it be meaningful. If I am eating a carrot and for whatever reason, I experience the qualia that we can encapsulate with language as this thing of being meaningful, then if it is within my experience meaningful, then it is by definition meaningful and worth doing. Whether meaning comes from an objective source or whether it comes arbitrarily as a result of some random permutation of existence creating it for us, it is meaningful because it's meaningful. And so since as humans, we seem to have this innate meaning built into us, or at least a drive and a desire to make choices, whether from the infinitesimally small ranges of moment to moment to moment, or from the broader perspective of over the course of our entire lifetimes as we project ideas into the future about what we want to be doing or how we want to be doing things. Meaning is, in essence, the foundation of why and how we do things. It's built into the substrate of how we operate on a higher level when we're thinking about reality. And when I say higher level, I don't mean like a transcendent level. Rather, I mean that there is a bedrock, a foundation. And I've previously described that bedrock is uncertain from any kind of language that we're trying to express it within. But on top of that bedrock, or rather at a higher level, which is what I'm trying to say, at a more constructed level of our experience, there is this thing that we call meaning, which drives us and pushes us to do things. So if we kind of look at the picture that I have drawn here, right? So it's a guy riding a bike, and he's thinking about how riding a bike is fun, and he really likes riding a bike, right? And he's happy, and it seems to be what we would describe as meaning. When he tells himself, why it's meaningful to ride a bike, he says, well, it's meaningful to ride a bike because it feels good. And then he asks the question, well, why is it meaningful to feel good? And obviously there is a set of answers to every single question that we have that extends infinitely into the abyss of reality. But there doesn't need to be an answer. The meaning for doing anything at all is really a preference or an aesthetic choice that we make with regards to everything else. Meaning doesn't need any kind of objective or certain base from which we can derive it. As long as we are given from the onset of our existence a meaning to do something that is in itself meaningful enough to do that thing. When it comes to asking questions like what is meaningful, or how should I feel about things, or what choices should I make based upon the meaning that I have, this is where having a model or a description about reality comes into play and makes things a lot easier for us, or at least, again, from our perspective, an aesthetic of feeling like we are having an expression of meaning that is actually meaningful to us. So from my perspective, there is no objectivity about any of the meaning or any of the decisions or any of the choices or anything that we do, ever. There is no such thing as that. But there is this aesthetic that we are projecting into the future, that we are projecting into this moment about the meaning that we have about everything. And that aesthetic is what is driving us to make particular choices over other particular choices. And within that aesthetic, we can create models about reality that tell us how we can better make our reality fit the aesthetic that we find most meaningful. Or how do I choose, or how do I change the meaning that I currently have? And where do I want to head, and what kind of direction do I want to have with that aesthetic of meaning that I already have pre-built into me as a person? And so although we can't within reality necessarily get to those aesthetics, we can project those aesthetics into the future as we try to attempt to get the meaning that we want most out of life because we find it meaningful. That is the only reason that is needed for meaning to exist within our experience. And it might be unsatisfactory because you can always run down the endless abyss of questioning of why, and you'll never find a bottom. But the mere fact that you are compelled and find meaning in asking that question is therefore meaning. That is in itself meaning. Meaning is this almost innate quality to the experience of being human. Within that meaning, or this aesthetic of meaning that we are trying to derive out of existence, or we are deriving out of existence, we can make models about reality, or daydreams about reality, that allow us to better or more effectively project the meaning of our aesthetic into existence. And when I say aesthetic, I really just mean how we want existence to be. because meaning is a desire or a want for things to be a certain way or to feel a certain way at the end of the day. So if I am riding a bike and it's meaningful to me, it's meaningful because I want and I desire to ride the bike, and that's what gives me the meaning. And it's not even necessarily that feeling good is meaningful objectively, right? It could be that meaning for you is, let's say, working really hard and providing for your family. And so by providing for your family and working really hard, you're getting meaning, and meaning therefore is providing for your family and working very hard. Simply because there is this internal experience of this is meaningful, it provides the meaning in of itself. So I think a good way to say it is here at the very bottom, where I say, despite the inconsistent and contradictory form meaning takes, it is meaningful insofar as we are compelled to call it meaningful. So now that I have pointed out how we can't have an objective or accurate description of reality, and I've also pointed out how meaning doesn't require any kind of structure or foundation from which it's built upon, insofar as we feel something is meaningful, it is meaningful. So now we're going to talk about my model and how I describe reality to get the aesthetic of meaning that I desire most. So the purpose of my model is to provide myself and others with an aesthetic of meaning that is satisfactory. We've already expressed that without an objective framework, since we can't express one, all descriptions are daydreams. And so everything that we try to describe or everything that we try to encompass with language when it comes to reality is a model or a daydream about how existence probably or could or might exist. A better way to put it is that it is a useful aesthetic of meaning that we are applying to the circumstances that we are within and then using when we are making different choices and trying to get to some kind of meaning that we feel is meaningful. Essentially what it is a thought process that I use to better regard reality and to operate on the different parts of reality that I exist with, and then to make decisions that allow me to feel like I am operating on or working towards the aesthetic that I feel is meaningful. There is no such thing as like an objective way to exist or to look at things. There is no such thing as this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing. Everything is this kind of arbitrary disaster of reality that exists whether we want it to or not. And we are confronted with that and we have to deal with that. And so this is essentially me coping with that. I am projecting or applying this aesthetic that I would like onto reality as a way of feeling better or feeling satisfied with the reality that I'm presented with. Here in the pictures, I just have a very, very rough and brief overview of what my model is. So we start with kind of this non-dual principle that there is a nothingness that isn't really a thing. It doesn't actually exist. There's just kind of this word that we use to express this thing that isn't possible to express, but we express it anyways. And then there is the something. And so from the fact of existence, I then describe it more verbosely with existence knows information. And so that's what the diagram on the left here is. So we have existence, and then we have the knowing, and then we have the content. So essentially this is a metaphor or a high-level daydream of how kind of the metaphysical reality exists. And what it allows me to do is it allows me to explain consciousness. It allows me to explain the kind of phenomena of existence itself. And it allows me to explain in further detail the permutations and the operations that information is performing as I am existing throughout the content that I describe. In kind of a contradictory way, for thinking from a non-dual perspective, that it has some spatial region that we are sectioning off, that is in essence contradictory to the non-dual foundation. But from my perspective, it is so much more helpful to describe the non-dual perspective that I have of reality with a kind of spatial element built into the content of existence. And so that's why I use it. And so from the kind of base model that I have here, existence knows information, we then describe information more verbosely. So information would be the possibility of the information existing, the definition of that information, and then the instantiation of that information. From there, we apply this basic structure of information to the context of being a human, which is in essence the context of being a brain existing within the content of reality. And then from there, we're going to derive some moral or normative beliefs about how I should be existing to best fit the aesthetic meaning that I have built into me. In addition to that, not only am I building upon the current aesthetic meaning that I have, I am building towards a better or a more ideal aesthetic of meaning that I feel is more compelling than the current one that I have. And that is the ultimate purpose of this model. It is to have a set of rules and descriptions about how I should be living my life and why I should be living it that way, with the ultimate base foundation being acknowledged as uncertain and non-objective, but still using it as a way of getting through my life and feeling satisfied with how I'm getting through it. Because whether I pick, let's say Christianity or Islam or any other kind of religion or belief system, whether it be Hindu or, let's say like a philosophy, like let's say Buddhism, regardless of the perspective that I'm taking about reality, ultimately at the end of the day, none of them are accurate or objective descriptions about reality. They are simply ways that the human existence regards reality and operates through it with regard to our aesthetic of meaning that we are desiring or feel is most compatible with how we exist. In the end, I just want to make clear that there is no such thing as an objective model of reality. And the only reason that I'm making these videos and the only reason that I think about all this stuff is because it fits into my aesthetic of meaning. Rather, that is to say, it feels as though within myself, within my brain, within my experience of being a human, that this is meaningful and useful and provides me a way of existing in my life that I would rather be existing in than any other way. And I don't know of any other model of reality or description that provides an objective way of existing. And as a result of that, I have had to, as I think everyone should, think about and derive my own aesthetic of meaning as a way of coping with or dealing with or feeling satisfied and purposeful within existence itself. And so I hope that this has maybe inspired or provided for others the same kind of aesthetic of meaning or a better way of looking at their own aesthetic of meaning or even acknowledging it so that they can make better choices towards the things that they feel are most desirable or meaningful simply for the fact that they feel that they are meaningful.